Hello everyone and welcome to Notorious Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm Notorious Guy and today we are balling on a budget. We are doing a budget Resonator Red Dragon Archfiend deck profile. Structure decks are a great way for new players to get into the game, for returning players to get back into the game, or for existing players to pick up a deck core for a reasonable price. The deck you see on screen right now was built using only 3 copies, that's right, just 3 copies of the new Crimson King structure deck. I'm proud to report that this build is alright, it's alright. You're not going to win any major tournaments with this build, but it is playable, fairly consistent. It feels like you're playing Resonator Red Dragon Archfiend, and most importantly, it's fun to play. Be sure to stick around until the end of the video. I will be offering very budget-friendly upgrades for this deck list. No card I suggest costs over $1.50. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can see the full power version of this deck in a video coming later this week. First, we're going to start with a card by card, then I'll talk briefly about why I chose each card. We have 3 copies of Soul Resonator, 3 copies of Crimson Resonator, 3 copies of Vision Resonator, 2 copies of Synchron Resonator, 3 copies of Bone Archfiend, 3 copies of Wandering King Wildwind, 3 copies of Resonator Call, 3 copies of Crimson Gaia, 3 copies of Fiendish Golem, 1 copy of Red Zone, 3 copies of Escator Dawnwalker, 1 copy of Fire Ant Escator, 3 copies of Danger Nessie, 1 copy of Danger Chupacabra, 2 copies of Burning Soul, 1 copy of Red Rain, and 2 copies of Terrors of the Overroot. In the extra deck, we have 3 copies of Red Rising Dragon, 2 copies of Red Dragon Archfiend, the OG, 2 copies of Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, 2 copies of Scar Red Dragon Archfiend, 2 copies of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, 1 copy of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Bane, 1 copy of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity, 1 copy of Red Nova Dragon, and 1 copy of Red Supernova Dragon. You guys can ignore the side deck. This is just stuffed in here for me to reference, so I am prompted to talk about it later in the video. Now let's start with our Resonator engine and Soul Resonator. Another custom card could not be printed, just for us. Soul is great for starting plays or for extending them because its primary effect triggers on normal or special summon. It can add any level 4 or lower fiend monster from your deck to your hand. That's right, anyone, pick one. Crazy. Soul makes everything important in our deck searchable. Let's move on to Crimson Resonator. Here's another custom card. This one isn't new, but I feel like it's finally going to get its time to shine. Crimson has 2 effects. First, it can special summon itself from the hand if you control no monsters. And while it is on the field, if the only other monster you control is a Dark Dragon Synchro monster, you can special summon up to 2 Resonators not named Crimson Resonator from your hand or deck. The goal of any Red Dragon Archfiend deck list is to resolve Crimson's second effect. It provides us with a ton of synchro material so we can combo off and make our powerful resource-heavy boss monsters. Vision Resonator is next. Vision is a new card that is not a custom card, but is still pretty great. It can special itself if there's level 5 or higher dark monster on the field, and when it's sent to the graveyard from anywhere, it can search an archetypical spell or trap, one that specifically mentions Red Dragon Archfiend. We'll go over those later. Synchron is next. Here's a familiar face. Synchron can be a little weird at times since it's a level 1 Resonator, and our preferred combo path is always level 2 Tuner plus level 4 Non-Tuner. But ideally, we'll only ever be summoning this off of Crimson's effect. Same thing goes with Vision Resonator. But Synchron being a level 1 isn't the worst thing in the world, because it can help turn any one of our level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro monsters into Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, which is a crazy boss monster. Synchron helps accomplish this by being able to special summon itself our side of the field if we control a Synchro monster. Also, when it is sent from field to graveyard, it can add a Resonator not named Synchron back to our hand. Let's move on to our non-tuners with Bone Archfiend. Another new card coming in at custom card levels. It can special itself for the low cost of sending a card from the hand or field to the graveyard, and while it is on the field, it can send a Fiend Tuner from deck to graveyard to modulate a monster's level up or down by 1. We will almost always be grabbing Bone off of Soul, and almost always be sending Crimson off of Bone. Don't worry, I can go over that in detail. I'll be doing a combo video specifically for this deck list. Wild Wind, another non-tuner specifically designed to work with Resonators, and now it's searchable thanks to Soul. It specials itself as long as you control a Fiend-type tuner with 1500 or less stack, which is any Resonator, and the turn after it was sent to the graveyard, you can banish it to grab a Fiend tuner with 1500 or less stack. Great card. Works perfect. Just as it was designed to. Let's round out our Resonator engine with our spells and traps. We have 3 Resonator Call. This one's easy to explain. Searches any Resonator. Anyone. Soul, Crimson, whichever one we want, whichever one we need. Next up is Crimson Gaia. This searches Soul Resonator, and also sometimes Vision Resonator, and also sometimes Fiendish Golem, and also sometimes Red Zone. Card is crazy. In addition to being able to search all those things, it also has 2 other pretty good effects because it's a Legacy support spell printed in 2023. It can flip all of your opponent's monsters face down when a Red Dragon Archfiend attacks, And when a monster is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon a Red Dragon Archfiend from your graveyard. I suppose we should talk about Fiendish Golem and Red Zone specifically here, since they are technically part of our engine, since they are searchable. So let's do Fiendish Golem first. A useful piece of removal. Fiendish Golem banishes a monster with 2000 or more attack until the next end phase. Fun fact, not once per turn, meaning if we draw 3, we can use 3. Because we're balling on a budget and we're a little tight on playable non-engine cards, we're playing the 3 copies of Fiendish Golem. Ideally, this would be a card you would go ahead and upgrade, possibly with some of my budget upgrade recommendations. Next up is Red Zone, another useful form of removal. While you control Red Dragon Archfiend or a card that specifically mentions it, you can destroy a card your opponent controls. As a separate effect, you can also special summon back one of your banished Dark Dragon Synchro monsters, which is nice to always have in the grind game. This is a once per turn, so we're only playing 1, so we can search it off a Vision Resonator if we need to. That wraps up our Resonator engine. I think it's important to mention that the engine I just presented to you will change very little once we upgrade this deck. Konami did a pretty good job at giving us everything we need to get started. Let's quickly go over our non-engine choices, our extra deck, and talk about our budget options. First up for the non-engine is Escator, Dawnwalker, and Fire Ant Escator. They are half of what is known as the Inca engine. This one is pretty easy to explain. It's an easy way to make a level 8 synchro. Use Dawnwalker to discard a card and special itself from hand, and Fire Ant from hand or deck. This seems good on the surface, but our best combo piece in the extra deck, Scar Red, requires a dark non-tuner, and Dawnwalker is an earth. This is definitely something we should be looking to go ahead and upgrade. While we're talking about Dawnwalker, let's talk about the other half of the Inca engine, Supe, Dustwalker, and Supe. Dustwalker and Supe work the exact same as Dawnwalker, except Supe is a level 1 fiend, whereas Fire Ant is a level 3 insect. Since Supe is a level 1 fiend tuner, and Dustwalker is a level 5 non-tuner, you can go ahead and use them to make something like Red Rising Dragon. That's great if the card you're discarding is something like a Soul Resonator or a Crimson Resonator, or sometimes even a Vision Resonator. Being able to get a Red Rising Dragon on board with one of those Resonators on field in rotation without using your normal summon is fantastic. I really wish they would have included the Dustwalker package. Next up is the Danger Engine. We have Danger Nessie and Danger Chupacabra. Admittedly, these are here not really to combo with, but to help deck thin, generate some resources, and card advantage. The only other choice the structure deck gives us for that role is Pot of Extravagance, and I'm not really a fan of Extravagance in this list. I don't like Extravagance because it randomly banishes monsters from our extra deck, and our strategy heavily relies on having specific monsters in our extra deck. Also, you can only use Extravagance at the start of your main phase, so it has to be the first card you activate. It has to be the first thing you do. The dangers still rely a little bit on RNG, but we have more control over that RNG because we can choose when to use them. This is definitely still an upgrade spot, but for now they'll do. Next up are some home run swings. We have Burning Soul. This lets you quick effect synchro on your opponent's turn since it is a quick play spell, or you can use it on your turn to go ahead and try and dodge some certain types of interaction. If you control level 8 or higher synchro monster, you can add a card from your graveyard to your hand, then immediately after this effect, synchro summon using monsters you already control as material. Also, it makes the synchro monsters you control unable to be targeted by card effects. Pretty great card. Typically, this is what's known as a win more card, since you have to already be playing the game, you have to already be establishing a winning position to even make use of this card. And normally I would shy away from playing win more cards, but we're balling on a budget, everybody. We got to take home run swings where we can, and again, our non-engine playable card list is a little limited, so Burning Soul will do. Red Rain is similar in that regard. This is another home run swing because it requires a lot of setup. It's a one more card, but I think it's worth playing. It's also one of my favorite cards. If you control a level 8 or higher synchro monster, you can banish all monsters on the field except the monster with the highest level. The monster left over with the highest level will be unaffected by card effects for the rest of the turn. Resolving this on your opponent's turn means you have interrupted them at a key spot in a key way and made one big bad monster that is very hard for them to deal with, almost ensuring that you're going to get another turn while keeping your opponent from establishing anything on theirs. The next card that I elected to play isn't a one more card. This is just a generally good card. Terrors of the Overroot. You can target one card your opponent controls and one card in the graveyard. Send the card on the field to the graveyard and set the card from the graveyard. This is kind of nice because you get to remove one card of your choice and then set back something that you ideally can already deal with. This is a hard once per turn, so that's kind of why I shied away from 3 copies of this. Also, I'm not really a big fan that your opponent needs to already have a card in the graveyard for you to go ahead and set. it can lead to some weird situations where you really want to negate their first action, their first normal summon, and Terrors of the Overroot is just kind of sitting there. This again is ideally another upgrade spot, and we'll go over that with our budget upgrades. Let's move over to the extra deck, and these ones are pretty easy to explain. 3 Red Rising Dragon, one of our key combo pieces. We need to max out on this so we can combo as many times as possible. The OG Red Dragon Archfiend is here at 2 copies because we are playing 2 copies of Scar Red Dragon Archfiend, and Scar Red Dragon Archfiend gives us the ability to go ahead and cheat out that OG RDA when it's sent from the field to the graveyard. Scar Red Dragon Archfiend is here at 2 copies because it's one of our best combo pieces. I like having the extra one in the extra deck. 2 copies of Scar Light Red Dragon Archfiend. This is just a good removal option and something that's accessible for your auxiliary engine of Azkator Dawnwalker to make. It's also just generally a good card. Destroys monsters, burns your opponent, has 3,000 attack. Next up we have 2 copies of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss because this is the best monster we can be making most of the time, and I want the ability to make 1 on my setup turn, and then 1 on the follow-up turn to ensure my opponent cannot win. 1 copy of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Bane, just because Bane is a little resource intensive, and it's really only good to help push for lethal damage. You can tribute off 1 monster you control to special summon back a Red Dragon Archfiend monster from your graveyard. That means Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, Scar Red Dragon Archfiend, Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, even the OG, even something like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. If it has Red Dragon Archfiend in its name, it is a Red Dragon Archfiend monster. Next up is Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. This is something that we would hope to use Burning Soul to synchro summon on our opponent's turn to just like lock them out of playing the game. Most of the time though, it's just here in the extra deck as a card that can help us close out games after we get back to our turn. Red Nova Dragon is here at 1 copy because it is very resource intensive and it requires specifically Red Dragon Archfiend as one of its material requirements, but that's not really that big of a deal because Scar Red becomes RDA, Scarlight becomes RDA, and we have 2 copies of the RDA. This is overall just a good monster that we're going to aim to make turn 1 because it specifically mentions Red Dragon Archfiend on its card, which means it is eligible to be used with something like Red Zone. Last up is our 1 copy of Red Supernova Dragon. This card is an absolute house. The only reason why we're playing 1 copy of it is because we should theoretically only need to make it once to win, and it requires a ton of resources, 3 tuners and 1 non-tuner synchro monster. Next up, let's just talk about the couple other cards that you might find in the structure deck that look good enough to play, and I'll tell you why they're not. So we already covered Pot of Extravagance. Here's Resonator Command. I mean, you could probably play this as one of if you want a little bit of extra consistency. The only thing I don't like about this card is that it requires you to specifically discard 1 Resonator monster, meaning your consistency card requires you to open 2 card combos to use it. I don't like that. I would just rather take my chances with generically good stuff. I feel pretty good about the consistency of this list considering we're playing 9 copies of Soul Resonator, 3 Soul, 3 Gaia, 3 Resonator Call, and then 6 copies of Crimson Resonator, 3 Crimson, 3 Resonator Call. And we're kind of even playing more copies of Soul Resonator because we have the 3 copies of Vision Resonator, and if we can find a way to put it in the graveyard, we can search, Crimson Gaia to search Soul Resonator. Next up is Red Sprinter. Red Sprinter is kind of bait. It seems really good and really useful when it's normal or special summoned. While you control no other monsters, you can summon a level 3 or lower fiend type. They mean Resonator. You can summon a Resonator from your hand or graveyard. This would be good if your opponent manages to clear your board and you normal summon Sprinter and then get something back from your graveyard to hopefully combo off on. But you never really want to be in a position where your opponent has broken your board and you need the Hail Mary Red Sprinter. Ideally, once you build your board, you would like to keep it. Also, it says when normal or special summon, but how are you special summoning this thing? You are almost always going to have to spend your normal summon on this, and there are just better things we could be spending our normal summon on. Why would we want to spend our normal summon on a level 4 non-tuner when we could just spend our normal summon on Soul Resonator, who can find us a level 4 non-tuner that can special summon itself? There's just more cards that do more things, and we're not really hard up for non-tuners, especially now that Soul Resonator is the thing. Same can kind of be said about Witch of Black Forest. Witch of the Black Forest was something that was played historically in Red Dragon Archfiend because it searched basically the entire deck. But again, we have good non-tuners now. We have enough good non-tuners now. We don't need to be playing Witch. We're going to have an easy enough time searching everything through Soul Resonator. Next up is Red Resonator. You could probably play Red Resonator as one of, just to give you a little bit of life points and help you stick around a little longer than you have any business doing. Unfortunately, Red Resonator doesn't do all that much. I would much rather have the extra copy of Vision Resonator in my deck. The second best level 2 Resonator now, because it does so much more. Next is Side Reflector and the Hold Assault Mode package. This seems really good because it makes a level 8 synchro very easily. However, if you draw the trap associated with Side Reflector, Assault Mode activate, the entire engine dies. It absolutely dies. Side Reflector will be useless in your hand, and Assault Mode activate does nothing other than also sit in your hand. I much prefer the Dawnwalker engine because if Dawnwalker is in hand and Fire Ant is also in hand, we can still special summon the Fire Ant from hand off of Dawnwalker's effect. If we draw Fire Ant, it sucks because we always want to grab from deck, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't shut the engine down. Last up is Fiendish Chain. This is something you could probably include as one of if you wanted to high roll a little bit, because you can search off of Fiendish Golem if you control Red Dragon Archfiend when you activate it. The reason why I didn't include it is because I liked the other generically good tech cards that we had, stuff like Tears of the Overroot or Red Rain, and Fiendish Golem specifically sets Fiendish Chain from your deck to your spell and trap zone, and trap cards cannot be activated the turn they are set unless specifically stated otherwise. It doesn't seem worth the spot, especially when you consider that you're going to draw it sometimes. Alright everybody, let's go over some budget upgrades and we'll get on out of here. Alright everybody, first up for our budget upgrades are going to be consistency cards. First up we have Supé and Supé Duskwalker, both coming in at 20 cents a copy. Good news is you only need 1 copy of Supé and you'll need 3 copies of Supé Duskwalker, meaning the entire Supé package is going to cost you about 80 cents. You didn't think I mentioned Supé earlier in the video when I was talking about Ascator for no reason, right? Have a little bit of faith in me. I briefly explained what this card does. Helps you make a Synchro 6, and it's exceptionally strong if you're pitching a Resonator to special summon it. Next up we have Pot of Desires. This one's a little expensive. They range from about $1.20 to $1.50, and it lets you draw 2 cards. Unlike Pot of Extravagance though, it doesn't come with any other restrictions. The only thing you need to do is banish 10 cards off your main deck. We play enough copies of everything in our main deck that I feel pretty comfortable using Pot of Desires whenever. But remember I said it doesn't have restrictions. We can always run through our entire combo, hold on to Pot of Desires, and then after we get all of the important stuff out of our deck, use Pot of Desires to just get 2 cards. Upstart Goblin is here. It'll run you about 60 cents. Please keep in mind that Upstart Goblin is limited, so you can only one run copy of it. But, it just helps. Makes you play a 39 card deck. Gives you just a tiny bit of extra consistency. Next, we're going to talk about extra deck options. First is Void Ogre Dragon. Fantastic. Level 8 Dark Dragon Synchro has a conditional spell and trap negate, which is great. Really helps us in back row matchups. Costs you about a quarter. Should only need 1 of them. Next up is Koi Belt the Blade Dragon. It's a level 7 Dark Dragon Synchro, and it pops card on summon, and has another effect that relates to destruction, but that's not really important. The big thing here is that it's a level 7 Dark Dragon Synchro. Sometimes we just need a level 7 to make, because Soul Resonator is a level 3 tuner at base. It'll cost you about 10 cents. Wonderful. Next is an interesting little package you can play around if you want to take a little more high roll swings. It's Satellite Warrior paired with Hop Air Squadron and Noble Knight Shield Bearer. Satellite Warrior will cost you about 35 cents, Hop Air Squadron will cost you about $1.25, and Noble Knight Shield Bearer will cost you about 35 cents. Satellite Warrior, when it's Synchro Summon, can pop cards up to the number of Synchro monsters in your graveyard, and Hop Air Squadron lets you Synchro Summon on your opponent's turn during their main phase. Noble Knight Shield Bearer searches a level 5 or lower Wind Beast-type monster, which is Hop Air Squadron. You can play around with the ratios between Noble Knight Shield Bearer and Hop Air Squadron to figure out what works the best for you. Next, we're going to talk about off-turn interaction. I use this terminology because I think it's more tangible to newer players. What I really mean here is hand traps. These are cards that allow you to interact with your opponent on their turn. We have Ghost Ogre and Snow Wrap coming in at 50 cents, Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill coming in at 25 cents, Effect Veiler coming in at 60 cents, DD Crow coming in at 60 cents, and Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion coming in at 40 cents. Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion and DD Crow will help you with your opponent's graveyard interactions. Effect Failure and Ghost Mourner will help shut down your opponent's monster effects, and Ghost Ogre will destroy a card your opponent controls when it uses its effect. All of these are wonderful pieces of interaction and definitely worth adding to your deck. I will caution you, however, that the viability of some of these cards will fluctuate based on what everybody else is playing. Next are some going second cards, with some cards that are also flexible enough and versatile enough to be used when you're going first. Dark Ruler No More, though, is a pure going second card. At 85 cents, it allows you to negate all your opponent's monsters effects, and your opponent cannot respond to it with monster effects. You can't win the game that turn because Dark Ruler No More makes sure your opponent can't take any damage, but once you've broken their board and established your own, it's going to be very hard for them to win that game. Next up is Forbidden Chalice, which is less impactful than Dark Ruler More, but a little more versatile. Since it's a quick play spell, you can set it on your turn and then use it on your opponent's turn. It costs you about 35 cents to negate one of your opponent's monster's effects. Next up is Book of Eclipse. Flips all of your opponent's monsters face down. Not bad for 10 cents. Next up is Book of Moon. Flips one of your opponent's monsters face down for 75 cents. Book of Eclipse and Book of Moon are also quick play spells, meaning you can set them when you go first. Love that versatility. Next up are some DM staples. Gotta love these. Raigeki at $1, Dark Hole at 25 cents, and Harpy's Feather Duster at $1. Raigeki is great. Blow up all your opponent's monsters. Dark Hole is great. Blow up everything. Sometimes your opponent's going to give you a monster you want off your board, so you can actually play the game. Harpy's Feather Duster, great. Destroys all your opponent's spells and traps for basically no cost. The last going second card I have highlighted here is Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and a couple Kaijus. You don't have to play Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, but it's a pretty good card. It's kind of like Dark Hole, destroys everything on the field, and then special summons 2 Kaijus, 1 to your opponent's field and 1 to your field. Even if you don't want to play Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, the Kaijus are still great forms of removal. Allows you to tribute them over your opponent's monsters. Kind of like Lava Golem for all you Yugi boomers out there. Gadarla and Radiant are 2 that I suggested. They'll cost you 15 cents and 50 cents respectively. Next are Going First Blowout cards. These are cards you can use when you know you're going first. First up, we have Dimensional Barrier. Great for shutting down your own opponent's deck that relies heavily on one specific extra deck mechanic, other than Link Summoning, because it was printed before Link Summoning. It'll cost 25 cents. Next up is Anti-Spell Fragrance. This is fantastic for shutting off all of your opponent's powerful spell cards, like their Raigekis, their Dark Holes, their Harpies, Feather Dusters, in addition to their archetypical spells as well. I can't believe Anti-Spell Fragrance and Dimensional Barrier are still legal, and I can't believe that they're this cheap. For less than a quarter, you can tell your opponent, you don't get to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. Next up is a card that's a little more fair, but is still very powerful, Solemn Strike. For 25 cents, you can, as a counter trap, negate any one of your opponent's monster effects, meaning they can only respond to it with one of their counter traps. Odds are they won't have one available. That's going to do it for all my budget upgrade recommendations. On screen right now, you should see a deck list featuring some of those upgrade recommendations. Hopefully this was helpful for all of you. Hopefully all of you enjoyed this video. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I'll see you on the next one. Be safe, have fun.